Okay, the recording has started. Right, okay, good evening everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee on Thursday, the 17th of March at 6 p.m. Before we formally start, I'm just going to go through our usual housekeeping and etiquette rules. May I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recorded will be archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback whenever participants are speaking? If a member wishes to speak, can they please either put their hand up if they can be seen on screen, or please use the raise hand option on Teams. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues to either the chairman or myself as the Democratic Services Officer. Can all other attendees, for example, officers and members of the public, please turn off their cameras and mute themselves until called on to speak by the chair. And finally, if any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then they should let the chairman or myself as a Democratic officer know. If they have a webcam, then they should try turning this off, as this will help with the broadband or Wi-Fi bandwidth so they at least can hear and be heard. Okay, thank you everyone, and I'll hand back over to the chair now. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you very much, Mark, for that housekeeping. Okay, now we start the meeting proper. First item on the agenda is any apologies for absence.
I've not had any direct, Chair. I believe there's only one member still to join.
Yeah, okay, thank you. All right, minutes of the meetings held on the 20th of January and 17th February. Are you happy for me to sign them?
So I'll move those.
Thank you. All right, anyone to second them? Okay, so Councillor John, thank you very much.
Just to confirm, Chair, is for the two dates. That's correct, isn't it?
That's
the 20th
right,
January and 17th February.
I did.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Remove both of them. All right, any declarations of interest? Nope. Okay, moving on now to, I think it's Tom, the annual delivery plan monitoring report. Councillor John, do you want to come up and say something?
Declaration of interest.
Yes.
I've got an interest in agenda item 10. I've got dispensation to speak and not vote on football fees and charges.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
for that. We're now moving on to the annual delivery plan. I think it's Tom.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. And this is the report of the Chief Executive of the Q3 Annual Delivery Plan Monitoring Report. With your permission, Chair, I was going to share my screen and I can walk you through Appendix B to the report, which, as usual, is the presentation that shows those items that are specifically within the remit of your committee. So let me just share that. And my apologies, I now can't see anybody, so please shout if you want me to stop, but I hope that that's now sharing for you, Chair. So this is the Q3 position for Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee. As usual, Chair, you've got some links on the first page of this presentation to the Register of Corporate Risks, to Q2 Sickness Absence Report, because that's the quarter to which we've got the latest information available, and also the Insight Board's action tracker, so showing the progress against regulatory proposals and recommendations. But getting into the meat of the item, the overall RAG status for the ADP at the end of Q3 is green. You'll see that this is broken down across both the actions, the performance indicators, and shows you the direction of travel. So this is at a corporate level for the whole of the annual delivery plan. And just looking at what has been achieved within quarter three, and this is shown as usual by each of the 4 wellbeing objectives. Objective 1, which committee are aware of as being working with and for our community, shows that we continue to perform well in terms of the council's social media reach through Twitter, for example, and we've further increased the number of subscribers to Vale Connect, which is the email bulletin, and that now stands at just over 83,000 individual subscribers. It's been pleasing to see that during the quarter the council's wellbeing champions, so that's a network of colleagues who are interested in supporting their colleagues' wellbeing, have arranged and taken part in a series of wellbeing related activities. So there are some examples here about woodland walks at Porthkerry, and the importance that the council places on providing opportunities for staff to get out and take care of their well-being. We've also progressed some work within the quarter around the space project, which is looking at a new strategy for how office accommodation and hybrid working is supported for the council staff, and that very much contributes to our post-pandemic recovery response. The council's contact centre, Contact One Vale, achieved a resolution of 88% of first contacts when receiving information from customers. There's a typo here, my apologies, Chair, it's not 105% of ICT service desk calls being resolved, it's 95% of those targets. The calculation was done the wrong way around, so my apologies for that. And there's some further information here around the Veterans Advice Service continuing to support service leavers from the armed forces, and being able to continue to further the council's commitments in that regard. When looking at Objective 2 in terms of supporting learning, employment and sustainable economic growth, the Money Advice team have continued to deal with a significant caseload, providing support and advice to residents in relation to financial pressures. And in a similar way, the Council's Vale Heroes project team, which is a team that brings together colleagues from across the organisation in services such as revenues and benefits, council tax, homelessness, housing, and the customer relations team. And they've continued to develop their model of being able to support people who need their assistance. And some public realm improvements have continued to take place within Penarth. The Esplanade has been resurfaced and is currently being painted as part of that public realm improvement. In terms of supporting people at home and in their community, we've continued to support the University Health Board in terms of the vaccination programme and also around testing. And the Cycle to Work scheme has begun operating during Q3, and that's been accessed by 54 of the council staff as well. And then finally, in terms of Objective 4, respect, enhance and enjoying our environment, we've got an item later on in the agenda, Chair, around Project Zero in terms of providing you with an update, but during Q3 the communications plan started in earnest on Project Zero, and I'll be able to give you some further information later on your agenda with regards to that. And 10 SALIX projects have been identified and approved during the quarter, and those are the projects that seek to reduce energy consumption and associated carbon emissions with them as well. This slide, Chair, shows you for your committee specifically the performance across the annual delivery plan in terms of actions and measures. So there are 142 actions and 12 measures that are tracked by your committee. And as ever, those that are red, so showing slippage, are linked to here, and Appendix C to the report that you have this evening provides you with commentary associated with the 14 actions and the 7 measures which have slipped. And we continue to report, as members requested previously, those actions and measures which have slipped due to COVID-related reasons and those which have slipped due to non-COVID-related reasons. And I wanted to draw committee's attention to the fact that that we've now seen a shift, probably associated with the fact that of the stage of the pandemic that we are now at, that slippage is predominantly now non-COVID rather than in previous quarters where we've seen slippage as a result of the pandemic. This slide highlights the areas for future focus and improvement within the remit of your committee, Chair. This is drawn from those actions which maybe have not progressed as intended, or demonstrates further work that the Council wishes to do. So in terms of Objective 1, just picking out some of the highlights here, further work to redevelop the Council's website is a priority for the future, and coming with that, we'll be looking at how we can ensure accessibility and an improved user experience for those accessing the website. You'll have seen within the report that the C1V refurbishment project has slipped due to a number of reasons, including capacity within the market, but also a change in specification. So that's an area that we need to focus in on, as is staff absence as well. And the latest data is highlighted here for you, including staff turnover as well. And aligned to that is some further work around the Council's engagement strategy with our workforce. That's looking at increasing the diversity within the workforce and making connections between the apprenticeship and kickstart schemes as well. Looking at Objective 2 in terms of supporting learning, employment and sustainable economic growth, continued focus around collaborating to encourage, support and increase volunteering opportunities, so that we can support the delivery of council services and also offer those opportunities for people to acquire much needed skills. Clearly, there's also further work to do to tackle decarbonisation within the schools estate, and also looking at improving air quality around schools, as well as raising awareness of young people in relation to the climate and nature emergencies. And indeed, that is picked up in the forthcoming annual delivery plan in terms of engaging better with young people. And they've made climate change one of their principal priorities. And we'll also be looking to develop a new strategy for and platforms to be able to deliver a new approach to supporting our staff's development and their well-being. In terms of supporting people at home and in their community, we're looking to undertake stakeholder engagement to inform a review of the future models of service delivery within social care. And then finally, Chair, within Objective 4, we're looking to develop a strategy to promote the use and retrofit of sustainable drainage systems, revise the local flood risk management strategy that's been delayed pending guidance from Welsh Government during Q3, and also progress the next iteration of the Biodiversity Forward Work Programme, and that's in recognition of the declaration of the nature emergency. The final section of this item, Chair, is around a recovery update in terms of the pandemic, and members are provided some information in terms of where we were at during Q3. Clearly, things have moved on further and equally will move on further still now in the coming weeks. But committee will note that proposals for the senior leadership team restructure, reflecting the learnings from the pandemic, have been approved and are progressing. I mentioned Your Space, the Council's office accommodation programme, looking at how we support our colleagues to work in a hybrid way and how we use our office accommodation going forward, and proposals were discussed at the first milestone review at SLT this morning on that, and further work will now progress in the coming weeks. We've extended the opening hours within the Civic Office's reception during Q3, and that reflected some of the easing that we saw post-Christmas, and we've continued, as I say, to support our colleagues in the health service in terms of provision of our premises and also support through communications channels for a range of different pandemic responses. And we continue as well to work through the incident management team with University Health Board, other public sector partners and shared regulatory services to support the pandemic's response. And finally, the Reshaping Services programme has continued to pursue the Council's recovery strategy priorities and blended those with our annual delivery plan priorities as well. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour for you, Chair, through the annual delivery plan Q3 report.
Okay, Chair, can I thank you very much, Tom, for that report. Very, very interesting, and lots of things you highlighted well. I'm open to members now. I've got Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom, for the report. A couple of quick questions, mostly regarding the exception reporting, those that are still on red. But also, before I start, just a couple of points about the sort of the preamble that's in the wider report that we've got here, which is the whatever the 180 odd page report that we've got today. Just a couple of quick points about some of the things, some of the investment which is being framed as being successes during Q3, and I appreciate that there is money and energy being put towards them, but there are two examples I'd like to highlight. One is a shop on Halton Road, which has been painted, and that in itself is lovely. It's great. It's better than it being left unpainted, but it's not the same as success, which would be the shop being brought back into productive use rather than being left as a closed scar on Halton Road. The second point is there's a reference to investments at the boiler at the Colquitt Sports Centre. Great that work has been done, but that's a result of many years of underinvestment in the facility, which has left it in a position where at the start of the Football League season it wasn't able to be used properly. So I'm just a little concerned there's a bit of a comm spin going on in some of those issues there. But turning to the sort of the reporting by exception, just I've got 3 quick points I want to raise. One is just a bit more of an update, if possible, around issues regarding recruitment to the Shared Regulatory Services team, which has got a couple of specific points there, areas that are unable to or facing difficulties in recruitment. Just wondering if there's any reasoning behind that and updates. Secondly, the work on progress with children, young people and families. There's reference in the narrative to the CLA manager. I'm assuming that's the Children Looked After manager, and this is a piece of work that's based around those particularly vulnerable children. So as a member of the committee on that, I don't think that's been reported to us in that sort of way. So I've just been interested in an update and whether that a member of the Children Looked After committee, that is chair. I know we've got a meeting on Monday, so it might come up in that meeting, but obviously this is a backwards looking piece. This is Q3, so I'd be interested to understand sort of whether those challenges have been resolved. And finally, the supporting the review of building, street names and monuments work that was taking place. I missed a meeting in the autumn due to my own illness with coronavirus, and I don't think I've heard anything since about that. So I'm just wondering what happened at that meeting that meant the work hasn't progressed further, if that makes sense. Simply because it sort of just seems to have dropped off the radar. I've not received any information about it since. And I was thinking the other day about what's happened to this and should I be chasing Tom, but so I'm pleased that it's in here, but I'm concerned that I've not seen any progress since then or been involved in anything. I was just, to be honest, I was wondering if I'd just been left off an email somewhere and never included back in the thread again, because those things seem to happen sometimes. But I just appreciate an update on those things. Thank you, Chair. Tom.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. I'll wait for, before Tom responds, I'll see if anyone else wants to ask any questions. Okay, well, I'm going to ask a question in that case because I don't get any other indicators. The thing I was going to ask you was about, obviously, I noticed recently that COVID levels seem to be going up a bit, and also hospitalizations seem to be going up across the UK. And I just wondered, perhaps, is there any evidence, perhaps, when people perhaps need a 4th injection, and what is the programme if we're going to do that? Because there does seem to be in the community. Remember, some of these people have the booster in the autumn, and now we're looking at March. And I just wonder, perhaps, do we need to do a booster? And if so, are we geared up to do that? But I haven't got anyone else indicating no answer question, so open to you answering now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I may take those in reverse order, then in terms of the COVID levels and hospitalisation figures, we continue to meet as an incident management team on a fortnightly basis. Welsh Government have indicated that it's now a case of transition back away from pandemic and into endemic, and indeed that IMT meeting on Tuesday morning is going to be used to discuss the future arrangements for how we keep a watching brief on the pandemic. There's been significant improvements in partnership working and strengthen focus around working in partnership as a result of those arrangements, and we're keen to ensure that we continue to learn and we reflect on those. I'll get some further information for you, Chair, separately in terms of any future vaccination programme or indeed how that would be rolled out. But I'm conscious that the council has always supported the University Health Board, whether that's been through premises, staff, messaging, in doing that. So I would be going into those conversations from that perspective. And I'll follow up with you in terms of the fourth injection, for example, via Democratic Services colleagues in the next couple of days. In terms of Councillor Johnson's comments, he hasn't been left off any emails chain, I promise, Councillor Johnson. In terms of the review of buildings, street names and monuments, some work was undertaken to be done following that meeting that you missed because of being unwell. I'm actually meeting with colleagues in Democratic Services to review the progress of that work on Monday, with a view to communicating with the panel members and looking to convene a meeting of that review panel to reflect on the work that was requested by elected members at that stage. With your permission, Chair and Councillor Johnson, I'll ask my colleagues in Children and Young People's Services for some further information around that Children Looked After manager and the current status of those challenges. I haven't got the specific detail to hand. I am aware that Tracy, our head of HR and OD, is on the call, and I wonder if Tracy, perhaps if you've got any information on the recruitment exception within shared regulatory services, that would be superb.
Yeah, I'm happy to, Tom, if that's okay with you, Councillor Wilson. Yeah, shall I just cover off that point then? Yes, Councillor Johnson, thanks for raising the point in relation to recruitment in SRS. We are seeing challenges, particularly around those specialist areas of environmental health recruitment. It's not isolated to that area. Actually, we are experiencing recruitment issues in a number of specialist and professional roles across the organisation currently. And we're looking at what we can do to try to mitigate that and improve our recruitment chances and options. We've recently done a recruitment and attraction strategy, which is in draft format, that looks at different ways in which we can attract, retain and recruit individuals in different spaces. And that includes looking at how we go about sourcing applications, and we've very recently looked at other social media channels, including LinkedIn, and we are starting to see some successes with our LinkedIn channels in terms of adverts and wider adverts to just entice people into looking at the Vale of Glamorgan as an opportunity for career development and career progression. And we're working on that with Tom and the communications team as well. So we're doing a piece of work around that. I think the challenges will stay with us for a little while in those spaces. So one of the options that we are looking at is how we link stronger with education and further education colleges to look at bringing in apprenticeships and how we can develop the apprenticeship framework to support these roles in the longer term. But I'm more than happy to provide further detail on any of that if you wish for us to. That's no problem at all.
Councillor Johnson, do you want to come back on any of those points?
I'm happy for any more information to be provided when that's available. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I got no other indication on that. So could we pass on those comments to Cabinet as per the recommendations? And now can we move the next item on the agenda, which is service plans?
Sorry, Chair, can I just double check in terms of the comments to Cabinet? Are they the comments, the questions that have been raised by yourself and Councillor Johnson? Is it
questions that are made and Councillor Johnson's made, and the responses?
Yeah. Okay, no problem. Thanks,
Thank
Chair.
you very much. Okay, we're now moving on to agenda item 5 now, which is service plans and target setting. I think it's over to you again, Tom.
It is. Thank you very much indeed, Chair. So this is now looking forward rather than backwards. So the item that's before you this evening at item 5 is the 2022-23 targets, service plans rather, and the associated targets. Members will be aware that we go through an annual process of developing the annual delivery plan, which sets out how the council will deliver on our corporate plan commitments in the coming year. And as part of that process, each of the council's heads of service develop a service plan for how their individual service will contribute to delivering those corporate plan commitments, how that links to the forthcoming year's annual delivery plan, and sets out in their service plans how they will utilise their range of resources in order to be able to deliver that. So the service plans themselves set out the contribution to the Council's 4 wellbeing objectives, as well as to the National Wellbeing Goals for Wales, which were introduced as part of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. The service plans are the basis for monitoring and reporting progress on a quarterly basis. So the previous item that we had on the agenda this evening, Chair, is the result of monitoring the actions and measures contained within the service plans. So they are a key plank of the performance framework. And recently, Council adopted the forthcoming annual delivery plan, which sets out those commitments and the 6 themes for the coming year's work as well. Due to the cross-cutting nature of the corporate plan, the vast majority of service plans contain corporate plan commitments that span right the way across those 4 wellbeing objectives. So it's really important, I suppose, for transparency and completeness that we provide all elected members through scrutiny committees with all of the service plans that the council has developed, and that's Appendix A, so they're being brought to you for oversight. However, I recognise that going through all 14 of those plans in order to identify the areas that are specifically within the remit of your committee, Chair, would be a significant challenge. So for that reason, Appendix C to the report is provided, and what that does is set out for each of the Council's corporate plan actions contained in that 5-year plan, the specific service actions that will be delivered and how they contribute to the annual delivery plan actions, as well as setting out how they will be delivered and monitored. So Appendix C has been provided for ease of scrutiny, and that will form the basis of our monitoring arrangements as we go through the coming year, and we'll continue to report on progress through the committee cycle on a quarterly basis. Appendix B to the report that you have this evening, Chair, sets out the targets for the Council in terms of measuring our performance in the coming year. So that's our target framework. You'll be aware that the statistical obligations to report performance were suspended during the pandemic by Welsh Government and the WLGA, and therefore there isn't complete information that is available to be able to benchmark our performance across Wales. Some work is underway with Data Cymru to develop a national set of self-assessment performance measures, and we'll continue to be able to provide members with updates as that work is continuing. So what we've done as part of setting targets for the coming year is reflect on those targets that or those measures which exist within our framework and within the national framework, and that we feel are particularly relevant to monitoring the progress of the Council's corporate plan. Again, for ease of scrutiny, the final column on the right-hand side of the table, which is at Appendix B, shows which of the targets are associated with the remit of your particular committee. So this report is being brought to you this evening, Chair, for your committee's consideration to form the basis upon which we will then be able to measure and report our progress in the coming financial year.
Thank you very much, Tom, for that succinct. And I know the report is not succinct, but can I thank you very much for that? And I just think it's very helpful in how you directed us to those appendices. Open to any member? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom, for the presentation. Unfortunately, I am simply going to refer to my comments from this time last year, which from the minutes of the 17th March 2021, Councillor Dr. Johnson, in referring to the substantial detail of information contained within the documents that Scrutiny had to consider, as well as the facts, the difficulties in setting set targets the coming year in line to the pandemic, inquired whether it would be more beneficial if members of the Scrutiny Committee or full council could receive a presentation on the subject. I don't think that a 288-page document can realistically be taken in and analysed and debated within this setting. This is the sort of piece of work that requires a broader workshop, training session, fuller presentation. I don't think that it's really possible for this committee, albeit as a sort of a higher level committee with several others that do more detailed operational scrutiny work underneath. I don't feel it's possible for this committee to really give this matter its full duty when there's so much paperwork and so much being covered. This is a £400 million turnover organisation, expecting us to be able to internalise, discuss, analyse, sort of the annual work plan within a range of other agenda items is simply very, very difficult to do. And I don't know what Councillor Sivinianum was going to say, but sort of if there aren't 8 or 9 of us able to have a discussion and debate about what these things mean for the council, then really it's being presented and rubber stamped. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. Councillor Sivinianum.
Well, really, I was going to. I'm pretty sure that we all agreed with Councillor Johnson at that last at the meeting that he's just quoted from. I think it would be really helpful. I mean, just even looking at Appendix C is quite sort of impenetrable and doesn't really, without you going into the 288 pages, you can't really direct yourself. So, for example, the engagement points in Appendix C. I mean, I'd really like to bore down, as you know, Tom, that's one of my favourite topics about engagement. So I'd really quite like to kind of bore down that. So if Councillor Johnson were making a proposal to have some kind of workshop, because I agree, otherwise we're none of us have penetrated it enough to have a proper discussion. If he were making a proposal, to have some kind of workshop, sort of detailed discussion on this, I would second that. I don't know if he is, Councillor Johnson.
I don't know if we're talking about so I'll just put the camera on as well. I don't know if we're talking about doing for this year, but I mean certainly I think sort of the best practice would be sort of that when this is done in future. And I kind of hoped or assumed it would sort of take place this year, but certainly for future years, I'd like to hope that this would be done with a further in advance. And with a sort of a proper opportunity for scrutiny. If it's possible to do that in the next few weeks, I don't know. I'll leave that to sort of to the chair who's looking a little concerned at that, and Tom. I don't know what the timescales are for this. Obviously, the new year kicks in very quickly, but I'm a little bit disappointed that something we talked that was raised specifically and directly on this item last year has not moved forward.
Can I come in on this? I did raise this point on behalf of the committee myself with Democratic, and to be honest, I think the main obstacle, it seems to me, is the fact that of the Local Government Act and some of the constraints that we have over things like workshops. And I mean, my personal view would be some form of task and finish group to meet, but I think probably for the new council. I mean, I'm very reluctant to make anything radical now because we're at the end of this council, and I think it's only fair and proper for the next council to consider anything. Does Councillor Carroll want to come in on this discussion?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I would agree with the comments raised. I don't think that it's really possible for us to give this the scrutiny that it deserves and needs in the format that we've been presented it tonight. That said, I think it's more challenging than simply bringing forward a workshop, because obviously the council's constitution, as the chair made, the point the chair made about the Local Government Act, obviously there are certain functions that scrutiny is supposed to serve. Whether it be as simple as having a separate meeting of this committee to consider this as a standalone item. That could be an option. I think that this does need to be done differently, but I think that obviously it's actually bringing forward something, and off the top of my head, I'm not sure what would or wouldn't be permissible within the rules. So if Tom could advise on that, or perhaps I see the monitoring officer coming in, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think the monitoring officer coming on this was very helpful. Debbie, do you want to say something?
Yes, certainly. I think a way forward probably for next year, given sort of timelines now, and I know the pressures that officers have been working under, might be looking for, as I say, for next year at, there are a number of options available. You could have a presentation, you could have a workshop, you could have a task and finish group, but then bringing it back to committee once you've had that initial piece of work where you've had the opportunity to glean the additional information that you require, then bringing it back to committee for a decision would be perfectly acceptable. But I am mindful of timescales, I am mindful of pressures, and I think I don't, this isn't just sort of down to one individual officer. It's all of us, isn't it? Sitting, at the meeting. It has been a particularly sort of testing period of time for all, and I think we've all got our part to play in the fact that we haven't been able to deliver that aspiration of the committee previously. But I think absolutely looking forward, I think something for us to take on board and to weave into our programme. I hope that helps. Thank you, Debbie. Councillor Johnson, do you want to come back?
Yeah, just to come back quickly. I mean, I hope it wasn't being misunderstood that the suggestion was to do it outside of council scrutiny structures and suggest that this wouldn't come back to committee. My thought process, I'm not really talking about this so much more in general, is similar that to, for example, to the Treasury management presentations that are given to the Governance and Audit Committee prior to their meetings, which help them to fully understand matters so that they can discuss things from a more informed position. In the case of this, I mean, perhaps the suggestion would be that obviously I've no idea who of us will be on this committee or who of us will be on this council, after the start of May, but certainly to democratic, perhaps the monitoring officer and Tom to consider maybe asking the new or the next set of chairs and vice chairs to consider, so the best way of presenting this, because there are obviously a whole range of different committees that's receiving these reports, and the best way of getting that message across. Obviously, this committee in particular is dealing with all of the council's work because of this cross-cutting nature of it, and therefore faces the brunt of a very large piece of work being passed to them that maybe is more easily digestible for other committees. But I'm suggesting that obviously that it's considered by the committee for chairs and vice chairs, the democratic services, the monitoring officer, Tom, etc. Consider how best this can be presented next year and obviously timelined accordingly. Thank you.
I think Councillor Johnson, if that's a proposal, I'm happy to second that, because I think it's a matter for the council, for the next council really, and how they consider it. And I think there are many ways of doing this. I think to bring it to chairs and vice chairs of that committee, plus possibly bring it to democratic committee as well, might be a good idea. Tom, do you want to come back before we come to the end of that?
Absolutely, and I won't repeat what Debbie said, which was I think really helpful, and the opportunity I think that it presents us now under the self-assessment provisions of the Local Government and Elections Act. I think perhaps that could as well be the starting point for this, and perhaps as Councillor Johnson says, we could look at exploring via chairs and vice chairs of scrutiny committees the best way to, on a cyclical basis, involve elected members in some of the engine room work that's happening, so that when the products are produced and presented in this kind of way, there's been an opportunity to be involved in that process in further detail. So certainly something that we can explore, and rather than waiting until this time next year to do that, I can start to reflect some of those considerations post-election, but within the self-assessment process, which would end in a report in the autumn, as you're aware, Chair. So we could start some of that work in earnest rather than having to delay it. So I hope that comes across as a positive and proactive response to the queries committee have raised this evening.
Thank you very much. Before I bring in Councillor King, does any other member of the committee want to say anything? No, Councillor King.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues. I'm very nervous about expressing a view because I haven't discussed it with Cabinet. And as others have already said, it seems a bit of a cheek when it will almost certainly be the next administration. But I share your views about scrutinising and giving due care and attention to some of the documents coming forward. At the Cabinet meeting of, I think, a week on Monday, 28th, I will be bringing a report on recycling and waste management that is going to take us or steer us through the next 10, perhaps 20 years. And I would really, really, really appreciate other people's scrutiny and thoughts and comments. All right, it's like most things. It's not going to be tablets of stone. It will evolve and develop. But that is a component part of my bit of the report you've just looked at. The report that's coming in a week's time is a significant tome with an awful lot of facts, figures, and costs. So yes, I think if you do make a recommendation that Cabinet leave in some way suggestions that the next administration look at how these things can be given better understanding and sharing and scrutiny or whatever, I for one would support that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. All right, Dan. I think we made basically Councillor Johnson made the recommendation, and I'm happy to second that. That really we should leave it to the next administration and the next chairs and vice chairs, whoever they are, to consider how to do this differently. Possibly using workshops, possibly using task and finish group, and I think that's what I like to support Councillor Johnson. Are we happy to do that? Does anyone want to make any other comments at all about any of the actual body of what's in there in the service plans at all? Don't appear to. I think we must note it. Okay. We might all the other points. Okay.
So, Chair, just to double check.
Yes.
Obviously, we're endorsing the recommendations, but we want an additional recommendation.
That's what number 3 would be.
Put in place for the future administration to consider other means of scrutinising this on top of obviously the regular report.
Yes.
You know, task and finish, whatever. Okay,
yeah.
Not a problem. We'll put that in. Thanks,
okay.
Chair.
That's all right. Happy to move on now to the next item on the agenda, which is the Royal Glamorgan Annual Audit Summary. Tom, must be Tom.
This is me again, Chair. Thank you very much indeed. This is a reference from Cabinet to your committee. It was also referred to the Governance and Audit Committee as well recently, and this has come from the Cabinet meeting of the 14th of February. The annual audit summary, which is Appendix A to the Cabinet report, is produced every year by Audit Wales, and it sets out a position statement of their findings of their work at a strategic level for the council. And the findings were generally positive, highlighting that the council's met the remaining local government measure duties for the financial year of 2021. It also confirms an unqualified, true and fair opinion on the council's financial statements was made. No formal regulatory recommendations were made for this council during the period covered by their report. 5 proposals for improvement were made, and they relate to specific pieces of work done locally within the Vedic Glamorgan Council, and there are a series of additional national pieces of work that result in proposals for improvement as well, and the report notes 2 of those reports relating to discretionary services and regenerating town centres in Wales as well. As your committee will be aware, Chair, the approach that this council adopts to any proposals for improvement, whether they're the result of local or national reports, is to consider those within the relevant council services. We report then the Audit Wales report along with the Council's response to the relevant Scrutiny Committee, as well as the Governance and Audit Committee and the Council's Cabinet. And once the actions to respond to any proposals are agreed, they are then monitored on a regular basis by the Council's Insight Board, which meets on a monthly basis, and members are then provided with cyclical updates as part of the annual delivery plan's self-assessment report in the autumn, and then a further interim 6-monthly report is also produced as well. So this is a retrospective look back at the work that was undertaken by the regulators, and we are bringing this to your committee for any recommendations or comments that go back to Cabinet for their final consideration.
Okay, open to any member? Oh yeah, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom. Only to be brief here, because obviously we discussed this at Governance and Audit as well. But I was just wondering, obviously this is a retrospective look, quite a highly retrospective look. You know, something's recently published, but for last year, and we're obviously a couple of weeks away from the next year. I was just wondering if the planned work had been undertaken, and if there was an update on inspections, work by Estin and CIW. And just very briefly, I think we've got reference to CIW still as being CSSIW in the introduction to the report, which is you know, now an anachronism.
Tom, do you want to respond to that?
Certainly. In terms of the update to CIW, I'll make sure that that's picked up, Councillor Johnson, in subsequent reports. And we are due to meet with colleagues from Audit Wales to review their latest position in terms of work completed in the next couple of weeks, and that will inform their annual work programme for 2022-23, which we will also be reporting to Governance and Audit Committee and to this committee as well. So if it's useful, what I can do is undertake to provide you with an update against the various local studies and national pieces of work. I'll do that tomorrow, Chair, through Democratic Services colleagues, and then subsequently we'll report the work programme for the coming year, which will reflect on any outstanding work through the committee cycle as well. But that would expedite being able to give Councillor Johnson the answers to the questions that he raises in terms of the current programme of completion.
That would be great. Thanks, Tom. Just wondering if you're aware of the situation with Estin and CIW at the moment. Are they conducting inspections locally? Do you know?
They are conducting pieces of work in both CIW and Estin. We've met as a strategic leadership team with Audit Wales and those other 2 regulators within the last couple of weeks, actually, to undertake. We do an audit and risk assurance piece of work across all of our regulatory bodies on an annual basis, in order that we can identify whether there are any potential areas of duplication or synergies of work that the 3 regulators are doing, so that it can maximise the value of their work as well as minimise any potential impact on our services. CIW undertook a piece of work within children's services within the last 6 months, is my understanding, and I know that colleagues in learning and skills are working with Estin. I'm less familiar with the work in Estin, so I'll get an update and include that within the information that I get out to you tomorrow as well.
Thank you very much. Open to any other member? Okay, I'll just make a couple of comments then in that case. I mean, obviously, one of the recommendations, if you think of it as a recommendation, is obviously working with the 3rd sector. And my understanding is the 3rd sector will be coming to this committee. I just want to find out from Mark if that will be the case in April. I don't know if you have found that out from, because I'm hoping that they will be coming. About to deliver their annual report, GBS annual report. Mark, is that the case?
I'll need to double check, Chair, but I'll follow that up and I'll let you know on the committee as soon as I've got information on that.
Thank you very much. And the other point is, can I also say thanks on behalf of the committee to the team on working on this. It's, to be honest, this is a wonderful report from the, from the auditors, the external auditors, and this is what we want, obviously. And this is why we're the #1 council in Wales, because of things like this, to be honest. And really, we are really relatively nitpicking, really, about minor things. And really, if you look at it overall, it's phenomenally good. Because so I'm sure on behalf of the committee, we should present our thanks to the team. Okay, and I know you're very much part of that team, Tom. Well, I know how modest you are. All right, and can you thank everyone else there? All right, on behalf of that, including people who are sadly no longer with us. Okay, who have gone to other councils, but I'm not going to make any comment about that. All right, then. So thank you all for that. And I think we note that, and and a word of thanks as well. Okay, we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is Project Zero.
I promise
That's
this is
you, Tom.
I promise this is the last one from me this evening, and then you can hear from my learned finance colleagues instead. This is the second reference on your agenda this evening, Chair, from Cabinet, and this relates to an update on the Council's Project Zero, which, as members are aware, is our response to the declaration of a climate emergency. The report has got a series of recommendations associated with it for Cabinet, and they relate to providing some information around the carbon data report that was submitted by the Council to Welsh Government. It set out some proposals in terms of the use of various capital and revenue budgets to support and develop the work around Project Zero. The Cabinet report also proposed some changes to the way that committee reports are presented in terms of setting out the decarbonisation agenda. It also provides some progress against the various challenges which are set out within the Climate Change Challenge Plan. And finally, it made a series of referrals to your committee and to Environment and Regeneration as the lead committees for this piece of work. And this report has also been distributed to all elected members for their information. The background your committee is very aware of in terms of Project Zero is our response to the declaration of a climate emergency that was made by elected members in July of 2019. It also contributes to the declaration of a nature emergency that was made by Council as well. And if I may, I'll summarise each of those recommendations which are set out within the key issues section of the report that's been referred to you this evening, Chair. So in terms of the Council's carbon footprint, Welsh Government undertook a measurement exercise across the public sector bodies using 2019-20 as the baseline year. It did that because of the potential impact on of the pandemic on emissions, and that was submitted into Welsh Government in the autumn of last year, and it's currently being interpreted by Welsh Government, and we're anticipating having a draft report about the public sector's carbon emissions very shortly. And what that measurement exercise did was look at the various different scopes of energy consumption and carbon emissions, looking at both direct and indirect use of carbon emitting services. So within Scope 1, that encompassed things like energy use within our buildings, things that we've got direct control of. And then in Scope 3, that was the emissions within the supply chain. And the report sets out the findings of the Council's submission. And the statistic I think that is worthy of real note is that 80% of the Council's emissions are contained within Scope 3. So that is goods and services that we purchase and procure. So exercise and effort needs to be put into the supply chain, as well as things like our direct energy consumption within buildings, for example. So that will help us now shape the future priorities for Project Zero, and we'll be looking with interest at any findings that come from the All Wales information that the Welsh Government provide to us. We'll also be undertaking to submit a further response to that data request in June of this year. The report then goes on to set out a series of different funding arrangements and proposals for how those funding arrangements could be made. So it sets out proposals that the Green Infrastructure and Climate Change Reserve, which stands at £650,000, should be identified as a capital reserve, being ring-fenced for match funding and grant-funded infrastructure schemes that deliver a step change towards meeting the Council's 2030 zero target. It sets out that the Project Zero Reserve, which is £500,000, should be used as revenue, and that should be used to procure advice, analysis, fund feasibility studies, and that would be subject to agreement for expenditure by the Council's Section 151 officer following consideration by the Project Zero Programme Board. The report also sets out some information relating to the Carbon Vehicles Reserve, which stands at £215,000, and that being utilised to achieve electrification of the Council's fleet of vehicles. So it sets out a series of those funding mechanisms and how those could be used to support the delivery of the challenge plan. The report also indicates how the housing business plan is setting out just shy of £75 million over the next 30 years, dedicated towards directly responding to decarbonisation of the existing and future housing stock. And it also provides some information about the indicative budgets. As your committee is aware, that Welsh Government have for the first time given indicative budgets for a 3-year period, and in the second and third years of that indicative budget, Welsh Government have set out some additional £20 million of capital funding across Wales for decarbonisation, as well as additional funding within schools for the asset renewal capital funding, with a specific need to prioritise decarbonisation as well. So the report goes on then to provide some information about reporting arrangements. Previously, scrutiny committees have requested regular reports on the delivery of the Project Zero programme. They will come every three times a year, every 4 months, as requested, and that progress will continue to be reported through your committee, Environment and Regeneration, as well as Cabinet. But we've also identified that it would be useful to insert a new section into all committee reports. So a new section 4, Chair, would be introduced to all committees reports around climate change and nature implications. Councillor Carroll has just indicated, Chair, I don't know if you want me to...
Yeah, happy for Councillor Carroll. Do you want to come in now?
No, actually, I was just indicating I'd like to speak when Tom had finished, so happy to wait and let Tom complete his...
Thank you, Councillor. So section 4 of the committee report template would be changed so that it would specifically draw members' attention to any climate change and nature emergency implications associated with proposals. So very much reflecting the fact that, as well as the legal, employment and financial considerations for members alongside our wellbeing objectives, that we specifically make reference to climate change and the nature emergencies within all cabinet and committee reports. And the proposal is that that would start from the new cycle of committees following the annual meeting of the council, from June in effect. The report goes on to provide some information around some of the enabling activity in terms of a communications programme, and members, I'm sure, will have seen the social media associated with South Point Primary School, for example, which has been branded using the Project Zero insignia, and we'll be looking to develop some physical collateral, for example, within country parks, that provides information for our residents in order that they can access further information via the council's website around Project Zero. The report also gives details of the training that is being delivered and planned, and my thanks to colleagues in our organisational development team for a significant piece of work looking at the relevant skills and knowledge development that is required to assist with this. And then finally, the report gives, because we aren't yet due to report on specific progress, but we thought that committees and cabinet would appreciate an update on some of the highlights. The report from paragraphs 237 onwards just sets out some of the progress that's being made, reflecting the consultation on the local development plan and how supplementary planning guidance will be developed to assist with this particular agenda. Progress around the development of the Green Infrastructure Plan, which will be consulted upon in the summer. Councillor King referred to the Waste Management Business Plan and 10-year strategy that will be forthcoming to Cabinet in the next few weeks, and that's a major contributor to Project Zero, as well as discussions around a local area energy plan, the contribution of the capital region to that energy strategy, and members will be aware of the outline proposals at Aberthaw, for example. And finally, I mentioned the council's submission of data to Welsh Government in terms of monitoring our carbon emissions. We have also recently undertaken a commission with some consultants to look at the carbon emissions across the Vale of Glamorgan as a county, so that we can understand what's the size and scale of the challenge to reach the 2050 goal for a net zero Wales. So that's it's quite a detailed and varied report, Chair, but I hope that provides a useful overview.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Okay, I'm just gonna. I've now muted myself. Okay, can I thank you very much? Councillor Carroll, do you want to come in now?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tom, for that presentation. It's a question in relation to the global uncertainty that we're experiencing at present, particularly, obviously, as a result of the conflict in Ukraine. At face value, many people would assume that that would be very good news for net zero if we're going to reduce our dependence on gas from Russia, for example, or Western Europe were to do that. But obviously, we all know that things are a lot more complicated than that. You touched on supply chain briefly, and I just think about metal prices, the impact that could have on battery technology and the cost of certain technologies being one example. Just a broad question really as to whether any analysis has been done on the potential impacts of the conflict in Ukraine on achieving net zero, particularly from a resource perspective. If things become more expensive, how we're able to respond to that.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. The impact of the conflict in Ukraine was the subject of some significant discussion at leadership team this morning. That focused on two things: primarily the council's potential response to the resettlement schemes that may be available, and secondly to the potential impacts on council services. And I'm meeting with colleagues on Monday of next week to further explore some of those potential impacts on council services, and indeed contributing to challenges around the cost of living, given the various different changes that have happened and will continue to happen. I haven't looked at them to date from a decarbonisation perspective. I think that would be a useful thing to do, and I will certainly look to reflect on that as part of one of the discussions that we have next week.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom. I mean, I wasn't really going to talk about this from that sort of perspective of the impact of Ukraine, but I have seen people talking about fracking recently and things like that, which I saw the subject I thought was dead and buried. I do hope the Conservatives and others aren't going to try and use that in the veil. I think we were all against that last time. Just a couple of quick questions about the sort of the pace at which this can move. I understand that we have gone out on South Wales for a consultant to carry out the work to understand and give us is that a new baseline for just the local authority or for the wider Vale of Glamorgan area? I think one of the problems is understanding. We went through a decarbonisation process and in my day job recently, and similar to this, sort of the 80% in scope 3, it's the realization of how much is not necessarily within your control, but is part of the supply chain on which you rely on a daily basis to deliver the services that you do. So I think the importance there is the Vale as an anchor institution, and the ability that we have to influence practices, both in terms of our procurement locally and the wider supply chain, and setting best practice. But that is an awful lot of work to be done. So I hear things like, oh, we'll get this done by June, and wonder if that's really going to give us a good baseline. At the same time, I wouldn't want to see any slippage, because developing an action plan and impact on that is going to be fairly tough. And just I'm pleased to see some of the comments in sort of in paragraph 257 onwards about the various processes and plans being put in place, because my concern is that there's a certain element of doing the right thing and being seen to do the right thing, but then completely undoing that work because the plans and processes that are put in place are completely opposite to our intentions. I'm thinking of things like Model Farm, where you sit there and say, well, how can development that's geared towards the aerospace industry and we'll put a load of cars on the road be something that works alongside our climate change and nature emergencies. So it's really I think I also want a bit of assurance as a member of the senior leadership team that that the processes and plans that we're putting in place are not going to be undone by other parts of the council pushing different agendas and being in opposition to those that we're discussing under Project Zero. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom.
Okay. Councillor Sivinyanen.
Sorry, apologies. I'm trying to get my camera to work as well. There you go. That wasn't worth it to see me. But anyway, sorry, Tom, I'm just going to picking up on something actually that Councillor Johnson talked about at the end. In 2.7 of the report, so during the exercise, it was noted that the largest proportion, 80% of the council's overall emissions, were from goods and services that the council purchases and procurement activities. Scope 3, that's specifically around Scope 3 emissions. So really, I was wondering what we are doing differently in terms of our procurement of other services and goods to ensure that those services and those providers are in line with with this project and with our aims. Just sort of an outline of what we are doing differently, really.
Tom, do you want to respond now?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, thank you, Councillor Sivinyanen, and thank you, Councillor Johnson. In terms of that Scope 3 piece of work and that 80% of the emissions within that supply chain, we're doing a number of things, and the first is reflective of the desire to see significant pace within this work. So within the data return, it's possible for us to identify the different areas of the council's business, which is procuring different supplies and services, and to have notional emissions indications against each of those. And the project board for Project Zero has requested that the senior responsible officers who are there to deliver these commitments within Project Zero undertake a procurement challenge over the next 3 months. And what that is looking to do is give the data back to those services and say, this is where we are identifying a large amount of carbon emissions. What are some of the things that we can do? What are the things that we need to explore? What are some of the barriers potentially to adopting that practice that would decarbonise those goods and services, and to actively seek out those alternatives? And how do we support that through council activity? So, for example, having received the dozen electric pool vehicles within the last couple of weeks, there is the potential that if we can support other service providers in that kind of activity, maybe domiciliary care, for example, that we would start to see the emissions resulting from those activities start to change. It will also require Welsh Government to reflect on how they measure and report Scope 3, because we may well have acted to construct, for example, a school in a net zero way. However, sometimes the way that Welsh Government measure construction doesn't take into account the full nature of the emissions, and we may well be performing much better than perhaps the data return would suggest. So we do definitely need to focus in on that piece of work. And in terms of developing the local supply chain, both Councillor Johnson and Sivan, you asked about that. The Deputy Leader and I met recently with some colleagues who are involved in the development of 21st century schools to look very specifically at the kind of social value and the development of the local supply chain around not only the development of the schools, but also their operational use. So how can we be ensuring that we support local businesses in order to be able to operate those buildings or facilities in a less carbon intensive way, and I can see that the Deputy Leader is indicating, Chair, and she may well want to come in on that because she's far more experienced than I am. The final point I was just going to make is in response to Councillor Johnson's query around the June date for receiving the information. That particular commission, Councillor Johnson, is being requested for the Vale as a whole, so that we can understand absolutely, as that anchor organisation, as a community leader, where are the areas, what are the particular challenges in supporting the Vale as a whole to be net zero by the 2050 target for that. We will also during June submit the next return to Welsh Government, but that will be specifically about the council's emissions. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. I'll bring in the Deputy Leader now. Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Chair. This is, I think the only thing we can say about this is that the complexity of this whole area is completely mind-boggling. But if we were going to, it's an absolutely perfect case study of how, if you feel passionately about things, you actually affect change. That, you know, taking motions to council and those going through change policy. They change the way that councils do things, and you know, we can actually see now that where those decisions in 2019, 2021, with the background of a pandemic, I have to say, are actually having an impact. So they're going to influence every single thing, every single report that comes to Cabinet in this council going forward. But there's still so much to learn, and as Tom said, you know, the a Sculpture in a Day, you know, South Point Primary was opened by the Minister on Monday, and it's a joy. But if you talk to the officers in delivering a net zero carbon school, they might have gone down the sort of passive house technology route, but that wouldn't have worked for a school. So we had to look at how that could work in an environment where children are going in and out, because you don't want them stuck inside all day. And so the technology was tweaked, and you know, our officers did a superb job. But then our next challenge is how do we deliver an embedded carbon score? So actually, the materials that go into it are zero carbon, as well as the way in which the school operates. And every single step, there is going to be a target going forward if we're going to achieve our aims. Then you add on to that about council housing and anything that we're building, and then you start to look at, well, what about retrofitting? And we have to learn a whole new technology about how can we get our existing schools, how can we get our Victorian schools into net zero carbon, and then we have to share that with the people that we procure from. This is an absolutely huge piece of work, but I'm really pleased it's something that the council has decided that they're serious about, and that we will be taking it forward. Whoever is in charge of the administration after May. So you've got that, and then as was mentioned earlier about the costs of this, and I suppose what I would say is, I mean, we were already dealing with increasing costs before the Ukraine situation, increased costs from so many areas, not least the experience of the pandemic, and that adds to the complexity even further, doesn't it? And that is something that we have to cope with. You know, we've had to deliver all sorts of services in an environment of rising costs, and that's something that we're going to have to go forward. But this is a massive piece of work. I think that our officers have been absolutely superb in taking this forward. And when I was talking to the Minister on Monday and his officials, and I said, you know, when can we come to you for more money to do more? And they said, you can come anytime you want. I said, right, we've got a list. And I said, we also need money for retrofitting. And they said, we're going to put a separate pot of money for that. And I said, right, put our names on the list. So we are, you know, we have to be ambitious as a council. We have to take this forward. And as our original motion said, is that we need to be lobbying and pushing other people. And I think that as a council, we are well placed to be influencing the actions of others. And that's what we should be doing. So thank you, Chair. I said sorry for being a bit of an anorak on this.
And thank you. I think we all share your passion there, Deputy Leader, and to try and stop climate change occurring. I'm just going to make a few comments myself. I think one of the things, you know, and obviously the war going on in Ukraine has highlighted the fact that Ukraine and Russia are huge producers of wheat, for example, and food is going to go up and up in terms of price, because as you know, wheat is the main ingredient for things like bread. And I think one of the things that we need to think about is producing more of our own food locally. I think, you know, the Belgian model has got fantastic agricultural land, but I don't see huge amounts of locally produced food here. And I think that's something that we do need to be looking at. I think the other area we need to be looking at is insulation as well. And I think, you know, we need to be looking at more insulating our buildings as much as we can to keep the heat in and to keep the cold out. And I think that will help to reduce some of our fuel bills, which are going to go up quite a lot. And of course, the third thing, and this is something we can lobby Welsh Government and UK procurement rules perhaps, is in UK is our procurement policies as well. So perhaps, you know, we could change things so we buy more local if we can, even if perhaps it's a bit more expensive than perhaps further away, because it has a better impact in terms of reducing the amount of CO2 emissions. So those are my observations. I don't know if Tom, if you want to come into any of that.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of locally produced food and a reduction in food miles, absolutely, the challenge plan contains several commitments in that regard. So I'd hope that when we bring you a report now in the coming months, you'll see the progress that is being made, and we have strong connections with the Food Vale Partnership, absolutely, that do have an interface and relationship with some of the very high quality producers that we have in the Vale of Glamorgan. I'll take the point in terms of insulation of buildings back to my colleagues in property services. I know a significant amount of work has been done around energy consumption in terms of heating and lighting in recent years, but certainly insulation is a good point, and I'll query on that one. And in terms of the UK procurement practice, absolutely, there is a role to play in us lobbying those organisations, but there are also opportunities for us to take decisions locally within our own procurement policies, and that's part of the reason for doing that carbon challenge in terms of our expenditure that I was referring to when responding to Councillor Simeonam and Councillor Johnson's point, because we can build up our experience and our approach locally in order that we can take that into consideration when we're making those spend decisions. And just finally, I suppose that's a good example of highlighting why we thought it was useful to have that additional section in committee reports, so that elected members are able to see those legal considerations, financial considerations, but importantly alongside that, the carbon considerations as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And could you pass all those comments on to Cabinet? Okay, thank you very much. And that's our recommendation, really. Okay, we now
sorry, Chair.
Yes, sorry.
Just to double check, you obviously want the comments you've just raised now as part of a recommendation back to Cabinet. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Chair. Thanks for confirming.
Thank you very much. Okay. We're now moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is revenue monitoring.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Caroline.
The report refers to the monitoring for the period to the end of January. Funding is available from Welsh Government for the remainder of the financial year to cover some of the financial pressures relating to the COVID-19 pandemic. Nearly £11 million has been claimed this year up to the end of January. The funding has been available for social care via the fund this year, but that is now tapering off for the remainder of the year for both the uplift for residential care and for voids in care homes, and also for supported accommodation. The table in paragraph 2.6 of the report details the current projections for the year. So I do need to say that it's very difficult projecting the outturn for this year, as additional grants are being sent to us on a daily basis by Welsh Government, and as I say, since this report's been produced, we have had notification of further grant awards from Welsh Government. So as I say, it is moving by the day. So the report shows the position as at a point in time, but as I say, it has been changing since the report was produced. In addition to the £4 million transfer into the fund, as I say, at this point in time, we were saying that £3.8 million was going to be transferred into reserves as a consequence, mainly of recently received grants from Welsh Government. So, for example, social services are now showing that they're going to transfer funding into the reserves, and they've had a new grant of 1.9 million. Environment and Housing continues to report the £1.5 million overspend. However, instead of this being funded from the drawdown from reserve at year end, which we had previously been reporting to you, Welsh Government providing additional revenue support grant this year of £2 million, and this will be used to fund this overspend. Just as an example, only last week we had an award of over £200,000 for contributions towards waste from additional grant from Welsh Government. In addition, the council has also been notified of additional funding of 1.2 million being made available for the decrease in income received from council tax due to reduced collection rates as a result of COVID. So the Welsh Government has received has got an allocation, and they've used a formula basis on which to actually allocate it to authorities. They haven't done it based on actual, they've just done it on a formula, and this was in line with the way they actually provided additional grant funding at the end of last year as well. So it's proposed that as no further hardship grant or loss of income grant will be received in next year, as that is going to be finishing on the 31st of March. What we've decided to do is transfer that sum into a COVID response reserve, and that will help mitigate the council's position going forward for any ongoing COVID issues in 22-23. The favourable balance on the general policy budget of £4 million was previously reported. However, we've also now reported an additional £200,000 relating to the council tax reduction scheme. We have been showing during the year an efficiency target of £500,000, and we have shown that we weren't going to actually achieve that target during the year, and we thought there was going to be a shortfall of about £170,000 against this target. So that's the general rundown through the report. It is a moving feast. It changes by the day. So we're doing our best to try to report to you what we think the outturn position is. But as I say, it is changing rapidly. So I'm happy to take any questions. Chair, thank you.
Open to any member? I think we moved that we note, and thank you for that. We're now moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is capital monitoring.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just find that one. Right, okay, so capital monitoring again as at 31st of January. So the report details the current position, and there are some points just to note for you. Some schemes are experiencing increasing costs, as we've reported previously. Due to the scale and complex nature of Bambi school schemes, profiles are required to be updated regularly, and we have done an update in this particular report. The council has been awarded additional general capital grant funding of 2.7 million, which is for 21-22. This funding is unhypothecated to give authorities the maximum flexibility. However, the award letter does state that one area that local authorities have specifically highlighted as an area of pressure is the maintenance of the existing highways network. So emergency powers have been used to increase the Neighbourhood Services Highways Improvement Scheme by £500,000 in the 21-22 capital programme, so works can actually be carried out prior to the end of the financial year. And the remainder of the additional grant was used to fund the 22-23 capital programme. Some schemes, quite a few schemes, have not been able to commence this year, or the start dates have been delayed, and obviously the report goes through and details the request for slippage. Just to point out, we have further revised the housing improvement programme, and therefore £5 million has been requested to be carried forward. But some schemes will now commence in March 22. Works will obviously then carry on and be completed in the next financial year. Again, the financial implications of this are that we will no longer be raising any unsupported loans, and also the revenue contributions to capital will reduce to 7.5 million. So this in turn means that there won't be a drawdown from the HRA reserve at the end of 21-22. But this position has been taken into account when the revised housing business plan was produced, which was approved by council on the 7th of March. So again, Chair, that's a summary of the report, and I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, to any member? I don't have anyone indicating they want to speak. I move that we note that. Okay.
Okay.
Fine, and now over to fees and charges.
Okay, thank you. Cabinet has previously approved the income generation commercial opportunity strategy, which sets out that as public funding becomes increasingly constrained and more intense scrutiny, a greater emphasis has to be placed upon self-income generation and developing and presenting products and services for the paying customer. So this report sets out the proposed fees and charges for a range of services for 22-23. Where there are significant changes to the fees and charges, It's in the body of the report. The remaining fees and charges are detailed in the relevant appendix, and I appreciate there's quite a lot of appendix because it's covering a wide range of services across the council. The CPI rate in January was 5.5%, up from 5.4 in December. However, having considered the main drivers for these costs, for these fees, tend to be staff time, it was recommended that unless mentioned in the report, an increase of 3%, which would reflect the estimate of staff pay awards for 22-23, has been applied and rounded to 10p. So as I say, this sort of the standard was the 3%. However, there are exceptions which are detailed in the report. And as I say, the large number of appendix go through and outline the proposed changes. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, open to any member on fees and charges. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Karen, for going through that. I've got two quick questions. One is regarding the introduction of, I think it's called a provisional crossover license regarding highway crossovers. Okay. And the reason I'm raising that is because it's the last year there was a lot of public interest around the enforcement of our crossover license, which was a £215 charge, and then people paying to correct any faults or defects as a result of that with relation to their properties. And I think I've had people contact me saying, well, why was I asked to do that last year if this is being introduced now? So I'm aware that there's been a policy push and push back from residents, but it does feel awkward to me that that some residents have carried out works that maybe they didn't really have to, because the policy last year for a while was to do that, and now that's been changed. So I think I don't think you'll be able to really answer this, Carolyn, but it's more of a comment for, I can see Councillor King has his hand up, and maybe other officers to consider the subtleties and nuance around enforcement of an existing policy, introduction of a new policy, and those that maybe have done the right thing by carrying out the work, but then find that actually maybe a different option is being put forward by the council. So I think there's I'm sort of raising a query over that, how this is going to be implemented, and what the workload looks like on that. The second is that there is a delay or going to be a review of the trading signs, chairs, etc. I'm just wondering if there's a time scale for that. I wasn't quite sure I could see it within the body of the report. Suggest that would happen, because obviously that was implemented later than April last year. So I'm assuming any changes will come forward to Cabinet later on, but I'm just looking for a timescale because that's not being published at this point in time. And very quickly, obviously, there are a number of fees, such as regarding bowling clubs, that have been taken, not being used anymore. As you've said, the number of appendices and space is quite long. I mean, maybe it's if they're not actually being charged by us, then maybe they shouldn't be included in there. And just a note.
Take that back, yeah. Only if Councillor King does want to come in, if I'm allowed to ask about the first point.
You're very welcome to step aside, Carolyn, for a moment. I hope Councillor Johnson will let me do the easy one first. Yes, is the answer. We wanted to give the street license stuff a full year, because before we sort of reflect upon that, so that will be a subject for a later report. As far as the provisional crossover is concerned, in the appendix, and on mine, I'm looking on screen, so mine comes up with page 17. But if you're looking in hard copy, goodness knows, because I often get bewildered by the way the numbers change. But this is obviously in a shorthand form. But what it says is, where a low upstand curb is present and the footpath appears to be of sound condition. And this is what we've been doing. And you will be more familiar than with me of some of the roads where the upstand is barely 50 mil, sometimes less. And what we've said is, well, it's obviously been there for blooming years. They're not bumping up and down a curbstone. They're not. There's no curbstone to capsize. They're not going over grass. And the hard standing has been there for some time. So whilst we may not have proper records of what is underneath, there is no evidence, and so we're granting a provisional license. And this is something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and this is the opportunity to do that. And I hope it will go a long way. I think the key thing is, and this is the one thing that's always worried me, and that was, it came to my attention about 7 or 8 years ago when somebody went to buy a property after they wanted to sell the property after their parents had died, and the purchasing solicitor did due diligence a little bit too well and asked about the crossover rights, and there weren't any, and the sale fell through. And what I believe is that the provisional crossover license will allow somebody to if the purchasing or selling solicitor discovers it, then it will be a record that the council is aware of it in that provisional state, and therefore it need not impede any sale or purchase. So that was what I really wanted to try and do. I'll happily try and answer any more detailed questions on that, but otherwise I'll let Carolyn can finish. But I would, if I can, Chair, come back, because there's a couple of things I would like to just highlight. Thanks.
I'm happy for you to do that. Carolyn, do you want to carry on before I let other members speak?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm not sure about the timescales, Councillor Johnson, so I'll come back to you on that one, if that's okay.
Thank you. Okay, I'm now going to bring in other members now. Councillor John now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just got to ask the question, does the Vale of Glamorgan League still collect the fees for football teams as I introduced in 2012? Because we changed the system in 2012 when I was a cabinet member, and this meant that the Vale of Glamorgan League collected all the fees, because before this, clubs were expected to go to leisure centres and pay for their pitches, and then some clubs we found weren't doing that because there was no receipts given to the council officer on duty at the various changing rooms. So quite simply, I introduced this in 2012. It produced a very good system, and in the early days, I think we collected more fees in the first couple of years than we had done for many years. But what I am concerned about as well now is that we don't collect so many fees now because there's less teams in the local rail league. A few years ago, there was 36. We're now down to 21. Cricket, the same, is dropping off rapidly. Basically, because with the cost of living, cost of everything these days, sport has got to take a backward step, which is particularly disappointing when we go to healthy living scrutinies and are questioning the amount of use at sport facilities, etc., and it's getting less. So I am a bit concerned about all this, and obviously the progress in a club working with the council and maybe even marking pitches out would save the costs of paying for the pitch. But at the same time, I note that at Barry Sports Centre these days, you're lucky if you get 5 matches up there on a Saturday. Where I go back to my days, there was 15 matches up there a Saturday. Of course, those days we didn't have more buildings put up on some of the grounds as they have today. But nevertheless, there were still 12 pitches over on the Buttrells, which is obviously concerning me for the future. So I think we need to, I think Miles's team needs to have a little bit of a broader look about this, because we should be promoting healthy well-being, and this is taking it away at the moment because a lot of clubs are dropping out, and I'd like to know why. And I think a lot of it is the cost of running a football team in the Vale leagues. It's different for some of the clubs that charge entrances. That's a different level of football. But the local parks teams are dropping off, and I am concerned about this. So all I'd like to say is that maybe Miles's team could have a good look at this for the future, because it's no good us in the future. I can see the long term that we will turn around and say, well, there we are. We've got no football matches up on the Buttrells. Now, what should we do with the Buttrells? And the next thing, somebody comes along with a bright idea of building houses. And our green spaces, I'm concerned about. So certainly, I think we need to look at and maybe work with the local leagues on this, local cricket associations. It's the same position in cricket. So I just wanted to raise that point. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and thank you for that point, and Councillor John. Councillor Carroll.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and apologies if this falls outside the committee's remit. It's just a question for Councillor King, really, regarding the provisional crossover licenses. Am I right in assuming that there would be no construction works required there with these provisional licenses, and the charges for officer time, I'm assuming, rather than for any works on the crossover?
May I, Chair?
Yes, can I come in on that?
Yeah, that's about right, Councillor Carroll.
Okay.
It's basically to the officer time to make the inspection, and then the formal recording. So that if, you know, let's be fair, I mean, I bought my house 30 years ago. I'm not dead yet, despite people meet me. So, you know, these things need to be recorded so that they can be retrieved, and it just covers that cost.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I sort of just want to come back in very briefly on the same subject. I just wanted to clarify that I'm supportive of the sort of the introduction of the provisional crossover. The problem that I have, and the one that's been raised with me by my constituents, is that there were letters sent out to them last year insisting that they do things, and some of them, you know, followed those letters and introduced works and paid for them out of their own pocket. And now, a year later, the council is doing what's the right thing. It's the appropriate answer, but those people have now already paid out, you know, to improve things that they were told they needed to have a proper license for. And, you know, and perhaps they might otherwise have got away, if that's the right phrase, with the new provisional crossover, rather than spending a couple of £100 more on, you know, both the formal crossover license that they were being asked to do last year, January last year, when the letters were first sent out, and the works that they carried out on their properties, you know, in the weeks after that. So really, it's nothing much can be done at this point, but I'm sort of just raising the issue, the fact that that the council at the time, officers of the council, you know, went in fairly hard on enforcement on this issue, have now perhaps changed the tone slightly, recognised that there are shades of grey on that, but some of my constituents will perhaps have spent money that maybe they wouldn't have done if they hadn't taken such a hard position at the very start of it. There's not much can be done about that, I don't feel, at this point in time, perhaps, but it has been raised with me by people who've noted that there is a new introduction of a new category that maybe they would have been eligible for rather than paying out last year. So I'm just raising that, and so while I'm not opposed to the new provisional crossover license, it's something that people are raising with me, that they spent money that perhaps they might not have needed to. And just briefly, I think, Karen, I think the question I was asking about timescales on reports was answered by Councillor King. He said that that it was going to be that it was going to wait a full year, and therefore they'll be going to the new cabinet after the elections to determine the future of the trading street licences.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor King and Karen, for the responses.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor King, do you want to come back now? Because I know you want to raise some other issues. You're muted, Councillor King.
The irony is I just did it click twice there. Never mind. We'll be the first one to have done that. Councillor Johnson's point about the works to crossovers is one that has troubled me since it was first identified, and I've wanted desperately to try and find the most pragmatic way possible. What I will say is that I haven't had attention drawn to me of any of those that we will issue provisional licenses for that have had extensive works undertaken. Now that doesn't mean to say there isn't one that slipped past my attention, but I did pay a lot of attention to this work, and those that have been done, I desperately hope were necessary, and we would not give a provisional license for now. If you're talking about bumping up a 75, 100 mil plus curb, we really do believe that is not appropriate, and therefore that's one of our criteria. Yes, I wish I could have done this sooner, Councillor, but I think the ones that I've got in mind, and some of those that I went to look at, and I think you know of them because they're in your ward. There's almost no distinction in the levels of the footway and the road, and it did make almost a mockery of the idea of a crossover in those cases. So I hope there aren't too many that slip past my attention where somebody spent a considerably bigger sum. But I recognise that you appreciate that we have now found a better way to go forward. What I would like to comment on is Caroline's already commented that we haven't really altered very much, except where we've had to uplift to cover staff costs. But there's a couple of bits I would like to draw the committee's attention to, and indeed the public, and that is the reduction in the cost of season tickets for parking at our coastal resorts, dropping that from £50 to £30 to cover 6 months, and from £100 to £50 for the full year, very much in line with the country parks. And we feel that this will benefit Vale residents who visit them, and perhaps notably Barry Island, because it's pretty much an all year round resort, with an annual season ticket effectively costing just £1 a week, which will allow people to go there as much or as little as possible. And I'd also like to say that although it's not exactly part of this report, we're about to commence, in fact we might have actually started digging at the time of me saying this, but we're about to commence the installation of a rising bollard and automatic number plate recognition system. I try to avoid jargon, but ANPR, at Rivermouth Car Park, Ogmore. And this will allow us to have an incremental charging schedule for that car park. And indeed, that will then provide far more options than the current £1 for 1 hour and £6 for all day arrangements. And I will be using my delegated authority to introduce that, hopefully before I run out of that. So at least to get that up and running, perhaps in time for Easter at Rivermouth. Now, we've got within the capital allocation, there is enough money set aside to introduce pretty much the same at the Barry Island car parks. And I think that will be, I'm not entirely sure whether we'll get it programmed. I would like to think it could be programmed in, but I think somebody's already mentioned tonight about various crises running in the world and goodness knows whatever else. And the supply chain is not what it once was. But I would really like to see ANPR introduced at Barry Island. But I would come back to my point. I will be buying a season ticket to visit Barry Island because it gives so much greater scope. So I hope they will be of benefit to residents and perhaps traders at Barry Island as well. Now, you'll pardon me, Chair, allow me to do small indulgence, because although it's not part of the report, but it's prompted by the topic of car parking, I would like to mention our town without a car park that has on-street loading bays in its town centre. I think you know what I mean. And I have to say, this is what I really, really would have liked to have done something about before we reach the end of our term of office. Because it's pretty clear that the existing loading bays have caused concern, particularly if drivers of non-commercial vehicles park in them during the loading only times. I promise I've sought the views of nearby traders as well as other stakeholders, but I've been unable to reach a consensus whether they should remain or be rescinded, whether they should be extended or reduced or even relocated, or indeed altering the times that the loading restrictions apply. And it is a sadness to me. I would have liked to have perhaps tidied that a little bit more. And just as a final point, I'm sure somebody's noticed, because it's only 58 pages, so compared to Tom's reports, this is almost a sort of bedtime quick read. But on mine, on page 19, there is a reference to rolls of 50 dog poo bags, and we don't do them in 50s. So please disregard that. That's a typo that none of us spotted. But happy to take any questions whatsoever. Thank you.
Okay, open to anyone. Before I bring Lisbon out, I want to bring in myself. I will make 1 or 2 points. Obviously, you know, we do have many fees and charges, don't we? And I think, again, if we could simplify the fees and charges somewhat for the next council, I think that would be a major achievement. I think that would be something that we can look at. And also, I think what we also be quite good for the next council is to look at some sort of price sensitivity analysis. So we look at what the impact is upon our demand when we increase or decrease charges. Do we, you know, can we look at that? Because I think price elasticity demand is an important concept here. And I think if demand is relatively elastic and obviously we increase charges, then the end result will be a fall in revenue. And to be honest, the whole point of raising charges is to raise revenue, not to cause a decrease in revenue. And equally, if we are decreasing charges, then we hopefully will also expect an increase in revenue as well if demand is relatively elastic. So it's a difficult one, because I know that also some accountants believe in absorption costing. All right, you've got to cover all these additional costs, and you know. But the thing is, accountancy is not a precise science, as I know. But a lot of you people are budget holders, and one way of trying to square that circle, if you call it, is to make sure that you try to do some form of absorption costing, and it is not easy to do. And you know, we've got to think about perhaps doing that a bit differently. So I would like a report, perhaps going to the next, not next scrutiny committee, but probably the next cycle, is that we do look at that, or the impact of revenue and charges, and looking at our income streams going forward. I mean, I do think what Councillor John said about sport, I thought was a good point, because I think ultimately, you know, we want more people to be active, don't we, in the community. We want people to enjoy sport and activities. But if we find that the charges are the reason that causes there's people to enjoy the sport and participate, then we got to look at those charges, haven't we? And perhaps maybe, as he rightly said, maybe the clubs take on some of the heavy lifting in terms of some of that work. Maybe we need to have that conversation. But I bring Councillor Burnett in now.
Thank you, Chair. It was only, I was just going to add in one little bit, is I think that when we talk about coastal car parks, we tend to talk about Barry Island, but actually the season tickets are such good value. You can go down to Ogmore or the top car park in Sutton Down as well. So you could virtually go for a day trip everywhere you wanted for £1 a week. Same thing goes for country parks, is that the the country park season ticket covers you for both country parks. So it doesn't matter if, you know, if you're a regular user at Cosmeston and then want to go and visit Portkerry, you're covered in that. So I just wanted to clarify that. And I think in terms of charging, it's hugely complex, Chair. I think that it would be really wonderful to see whether or not it could be simplified. I think the only issue you've got there is whether or not, in doing so, a one-size-fits-all then tends to miss the point, and some people end up getting penalised and some people don't. I think apart from the parking charges that we use in terms of supporting non-statutory provision, such as the resort management on Barry Island or the running of country parks and paying for extras in country parks, which is what we're doing with that. Most of our charges are an attempt to get to cost neutral. And those services actually still cost us money, but we charge so that, as I said, we can offset the cost to us. But I'm not aware of any of those. I'm sort of looking at Carolyn and Peter. I'm not aware of any of those that would actually make a profit, would make a surplus for us. So, you know, it's one of those juggling acts, because obviously we want people to be active and out and about and that sort of thing. We also want them to have good quality facilities, and to try and find a balance in that is really difficult. But I mean, maybe it's a task unfinished group for scrutiny. I don't know, because it is something that's probably going to take an awful lot of heads together to try and come up with any solutions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burnett, for that. Councillor King.
Yeah, it's picking up very much what my colleague just said. I when it comes to making a surplus, a great deal of our fees and charges do not even cover the costs. They're there for varying purposes. My father once said to me, people don't value what they don't pay for, so sometimes you actually have to level a fee just so that people aren't they're not mindful. But we still provide an awful lot for which we don't charge. And I think that Councillor John's point about sport is something, it's not within my portfolio, but it's something that I am very mindful about. And I've had various discussions over the past few years about varying fees. But one thing I would say is we've mostly been preoccupied with an almighty crisis through this term of office. And I am immensely proud of Neighbourhood Services and Transport, who initially we had a massive hiatus over things like road repairs, but we sustained our doorstep collections of waste and recycling and food and all the rest of it. And we opened up the household waste recycling centre with a booking system, which initially people complained about, but now people think is the best thing we've ever done. And that is of no direct cost to anybody. If it hadn't been for that, I think my officers and I we would have gone through some of these fees, because if you go through them, or your section of them with a fine tooth comb, you think, does anybody actually do this? There's a fee here, and has anybody ever charged it is one of my questions. So perhaps if things return to this normal, the next administration will have that opportunity to do exactly as you've said, to go through that fee structure. But the problem I have, and it is a balancing act, especially when you're providing a lot of services that are not necessarily statutory. Once you've designated the council funding for schools and social care, you've not got so much spending power left, and things like Cosmeston are non-statutory, and you know, keeping Barry Island as pretty and as nice as we do, it too is non-statutory, and you think you've got to cover your costs. You've got to try and if you've got hundreds of people coming in to Barry Island, I love them all dearly, but they don't always pick up their litter. And there's a cost to cleaning up the beach, and there's a cost to emptying all those bins. And I think, yes, I think if we have more time, if we can go through this and keep an eye on things, that's exactly what we want to do. I don't particularly seek to make a surplus. But I do think you have to cover your costs. And if the tourists, I mean, tomorrow I would imagine Cardiff Council will have an almighty bill for sweeping up and cleaning up, because sorry, not tomorrow, the day after, because of all the rugby fans, and right, we don't get quite that hiatus, but we do get big crowds come down to Barry Island, and so yes, I think I take on board everything you've said, but I think I'm hoping that if a new normal emerges over the next term of office, I am confident my successor will want to do exactly that, because I know my officers would like to. So I'll shut up.
Thank you. I got no one else indicating who wants to speak, and I take it that's a legacy hand. Yes, it is. And can I thank you all, and can I thank all the efforts that have been made for those fees and charges, because I know that's a very comprehensive report, and I think we moved as a scrutiny committee that we noted those changes. And can I thank you all? I got nothing under urgent. All right, everyone to stay safe, and I will see you no part 2 for the ultimate meeting. Okay, next month. Yeah. Take care.
Chair, do you want the final date for that meeting? We
yes,
do have
please.
It's Thursday, 14th of April at 6 p.m.
And by then we know all the oneers and widers then, won't we? All right. All right, take care. See you all. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye.